Okay, so let's get going with our class here tonight. I think it's class number 5. Um, I said in today's WhatsApp, and let me remind you that if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. It gives me a chance to take a sip of water, take a breath, and it's always a lot more exciting when there's, involvement with everybody. Okay, so I said we were going to talk a little bit about, I think at the beginning when people heard we were going to have a Kabbalah class, so people don't know what Kabbalah class means. And we dealt with that quite a bit in our first class and in our second class, um, so that nobody had any kind of misleading ideas of what they were going to be getting over here, right? What is Kabbalah? How exactly it evolved to our time? There's another side to Kabbalah which is called Kabbalah Ma'asit, and that is practical Kabbalah. What we're learning over here is the knowledge of Kabbalah. And then there is the way the Kabbalah is practiced in order to manipulate forces and energy and things of that sort, which we don't do these days. And that's where the question that I posed in the WhatsApp in regards to this guy, we'll call him Yoshka, Jesus, and it's part of actually what I'm going to tell you about, um, and that's going to be an explanation why you don't want to even say something which is negative and bad. When you verbalize whatever, you are creating some very real vibration in the air, some very real energy that gets transmitted. It gets inputted into the universe. And if you're listening within a hearing range, then it actually goes into your brain. And this is it's a very real input. So, all of us can relate to the idea that if you're in the area of somebody with an infectious disease, so we all recognize the very real danger it is to be, in his proximity, because if he breathes, his breath is infected and it goes into the air. There's droplets or whatever it is. And if you're close enough, or even if you're not close enough, there's a wind blowing, whatever, and it goes into your nose, it goes into your mouth, it goes into your lungs, you catch it. It's no different. And as a matter of fact, it's even more powerful and more true when it comes to the words that you hear. Whatever words that you hear that a person generates, if it's words of Torah, if it's words of positivity, if it's words that are upbeat, you are exposing yourself to a very real influence that you are allowing to go into your system. If you hear words that are negative, that are disgusting, that are degrading, then you are exposing yourself to some very real kind of negative influence inside your system. So the words that we say are very, very serious. And that is why, both in the positive and the negative, you're not allowed to say God's name, because it's disrespectful. How can you go and enunciate, the real name of God? Where did it come to a regular person to sort of say, connect in that kind of a way with somebody who's so exalted and so holy? So you use, a title. I mean, that was always the case when it came to the way we relate to a parent, the way we relate to a teacher. I mean, that's the way it used to be, and that's the way it should be. If somebody is head and shoulders above you, you just don't call them by their name. There's a little distance. There's a little, a degree of awe and of respect. So we don't say bad words. And therefore, we don't say, in the Orthodox world, we don't even say the word cancer, right? It's such a terrible disease. We don't want to have any kind of attachment or connection to this very terrible illness. But they have no cure for it, and people die, and whatever else is. So in Yiddish, the expression is yenemachle, that sickness. When you talk about that sickness, that illness, we know we're talking about cancer. Now, when it's important to go and say what you're talking about because people won't know, then you say it. It serves a purpose. But you try to avoid that connection and attachment to these things. This is all Kabbalah. What I'm telling you right now, that's all part of the metaphysical truth of existence and of behavior. So we don't say the name Jesus when we can avoid it. And the question I asked on the WhatsApp is, what was his strength? Did he practice any kind of practical Kabbalah? Now, what we've been studying the last couple of weeks, right, was more the knowledge of the spiritual realm. But then there is a way in which that is harnessed into in a very practical, kind of applicable kind of a way. The great big books say that, anybody who is involved and gets himself, connected with practical Kabbalah, very, very bad things are going to come to him because he's dealing with forces that in all likelihood he cannot really handle, and it will end up destroying him and destroying his family. As a matter of fact, this is part of the story. I don't want to turn tonight's class into only talking about this, even though it's all part of the subject Kabbalah, right? It's written in the books of Kabbalah, the great mystics, that a person who involves himself in the practical Kabbalah and actually, so to say, using and applying these forces in some way to manipulate what he wants to see happen, right? He'll end up being reincarnated into a black dog. Okay? So, and that's not a good thing. Number one, a dog is not a good thing, even though some of them are very cute and they can serve an important, purpose. But let's just talk about the ones that are scary and that are wild, and and especially if they're black. So that's not a good thing. That a human soul, if anybody was on our Journey of the Soul series of classes, right, a soul reincarnating into a dog is a very great big punishment to the soul. So what's the story with well, it's in Yiddish the name is Yoshke. So what the books say is that Yoshke, he actually, some people say that he knew and he brought the discipline of magic. Now that's really something else altogether. But he was a student of the magic of Egypt, and he used that to impress his followers. Another thing that he did in order to impress his followers so that they can think of him as, truly a great individual is that he practiced Kabbalah. And one of the things the books say he did was one time he went into the temple and he tattooed on his hand the name of God. And according to these books, he was familiar with the actual 4-letter name of God, the way it is pronounced by the high priest in the Holy of Holies. This is like an incredible kind of connection and attachment, and sort of say a plug-in with some very intense kinds of energy. And in Hebrew, his name is Yeshu. Yeshu was familiar with the Shem HaMeforash, with the essential name of God, and he said that name of God the way it's supposed to be pronounced, and then he tattooed it on his hand, and then he brought out the energy from the temple when he left the temple, and then he started to do all kinds of sort of say miracles and manipulations of the forces, and that's where all of a sudden he gained his following and his fame. So it's pretty interesting, but so well, and that's never been good to the Jewish people, right? The whole Christian Catholic religion was not a good thing for Judaism throughout all the ages, with all the crusades and with all the anti-Semitism and with all the hatred and whatever else it is, so That's as far as practicing Kabbalah. That's exactly what Yeshu did. He applied the knowledge of mysticism in a practical way, but it got manipulated in a negative way, which only brought about harm to himself and harm to the Jewish people. I don't know if you want to hear this, a very interesting story. You want me to tell you the story, very interesting story about practical Kabbalah, or should we get into the Patach Eliyahu? Let me give you the option. Who wants to hear a crazy, crazy story?
I want to hear a story.
Okay. The crazy story goes like this. There was a Kabbalist who was a recognized Kabbalist. He lived around the 1500s, like just around before the Arizal. And actually, I'll tell you a little bit about the Arizal, right? The Arizal was Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, who lived in the 1500s in Sfas, and he's the recognized greatest teacher of mysticism. So a little bit before him, there was this guy by the name of Rabbi Yosef Deliraina. This Yosef Deliraina, who was a true student of Kabbalah and a real scholar of Judaism, he decided that he wanted to bring Mashiach, right? The ultimate, so to say, goal and purpose of mankind. And what happened is that he did a process that mysticism talks about, which is called Shalas Chaloim. He put a question before God in a dream. There's a whole process how that's done. You write the name of God, you put it under your pillow, and you prepare yourself for sleep in certain kinds of ways. And he did this. And in his dream, he asked, that he wanted to bring Mashiach. And he was told that, it's still not ripe for Mashiach to come. But, he insisted, and he wanted very much to do it anyway. And, some people, just that's the way they are. They're smarter or, and there is sometimes a place for that. But, most of the time it's not very healthy and it's not very wise. And so he insisted he wanted to bring Mashiach. He fasted, and together with 4 students, in order to attract Elijah the prophet. We all know Elijah the prophet is one of the few people that never died, right? He went up to heaven in a chariot of fire, and his soul and his body is forever. And it comes down to certain people in different ways. Sometimes Elijah the prophet comes to people in a physical form. Most of the time he comes down more spiritually as a spirit. But anyways, Elijah the prophet came down to this Rabbi Yosef Deliraina, and he told him, listen, you better change your way. This is not a good path that you're taking. But he still wanted to go on. And he continued with his fasting and with his doing all these kind of Kabbalistic type of things until he went to some kind of a dark kind of a cave. And all of a sudden, these 2 dogs showed up before him that were barking like crazy, and they were very scary. So he took the name of God that he had with him and a blanket, and it's a crazy story, but this is the kind of world that this, I guess this is what people really think about when they hear Kabbalah and mysticism. So this is, the practice of using these energies in those types of ways. So he took this blanket with the name of God and he covered over the 2 dogs. And supposedly these 2 dogs, right, he recognized that these 2 dogs were the arch force of negativity, the male and the female of these 2 very, very great big forces. But when he covered them over with the blanket and with the name of God, and then he picked they quieted down. He picked up the blanket, and all of a sudden they started to purr, and they calmed down. And I heard one version is that they actually started to appear more like human beings, and they started to beg for food. That they were hungry. But Yosef Deliraina, what's his name? he knew that it's not a good idea to feed them because essentially these were from the forces of negativity. Anyway, so but they kept on purring and they kept on begging and they kept on saying we're hungry. And he said, I don't have any food. I'm fasting myself. But they said, listen, you have with you some kind of a scent that you use when you're really, really, hungry, that you seem to be smelling. Can you just even allow us to smell of that kind of tobacco or whatever it is that you're smelling? And he gave in to them. And when he gave in to them and he gave them a little bit of his energy for them to sort of say nurture and for them to suck, it's like a vampire of some sort, right? They turned again into these crazy, crazy dogs. And the end was that the 4 students ran away. One died on the spot. The other ones, they converted. I mean, the 4 of them went off completely off the way. And this guy, Yosef de la Reina himself, he in the end, if I'm not mistaken, he in the end converted out of the faith. I guess it was to Christianity or something, some other faith. And years later, the Arizal was once walking in Tzfas with his student, Rabbi Chaim Vital, and there was a black dog that they passed that was barking, and the Arizal said, this is Rabbi Yosef de la Reina, who was reincarnated now into this dog. What's the point of the story? The point of the story is that, yes, there is a side and there is an aspect of what's called, practical Kabbala. But as in the 2 stories, I can tell you more stories. I'll tell you just one more because we talked about the Arizal, right? And the Arizal's yahrzeit is actually coming up in 3 days. It's on the 5th of this month. Today's the 2nd of the Hebrew month, and so that's in 3 days. It's his passing, and here is 2 stories about the Arizal. Just in a nutshell, is that once the Arizal, he was teaching some secrets to his student and to students about the forces of impurity, and all of a sudden a black crow, and also black crows are not a good symbol in mysticism. So a black crow came by and it started to crow, make its sounds. And the Arizal said, I just heard the crow say, because the Arizal was able to know the languages of the animals and of the trees. The Arizal was just incredible, incredible spiritual individual. But he wasn't a manipulator of forces like I just told you this, Rabbi Yosef de la Reina. He wasn't a manipulator in such a way like Yeshua was, right? He reached that level because, as we were talking last week and the week before, he actually refined his body to such a point where the energy which is underlying everything was almost one with him as a human being. So there was a symbiotic relationship with the underlying energy to everything. It wasn't like from the outside manipulating and not knowing the whole picture. It was like almost on the inside being part of what happens. That was the case of the Arizal. But anyways, and even somebody like the Arizal, this black crow went and flew over and started to crow. And the Arizal said, the crow just said, he right away he made the bracha, Baruch Dain Ha'emes, which is a blessing you make over the news that somebody passed away. And he said, the crow just told me that my son is going to pass away, that he's a dead man. And that's because I just taught something, and I sort of say I connected through my talking. Here the talking, right? Through my talking, I connected with this bad energy, which I shouldn't have really done, and it caused that my son should die. He went home. His son was very sick that night, and 3 days later died. You can go today when you go to Tzfas, right? This younger son of his, whose name is Moshe, is buried right there next to the Arizal. The Arizal himself, who died, I think, at the age of 38 or something like that, right? Passed away, according to his student, Reb Chaim Vital, because Reb Chaim Vital insisted to be taught a certain secret. Let me back up just a little bit. I see the time is going, so I don't want to. I want to get into the Pasach Aliyah, which we're learning. So the Arizal lived in Egypt. He actually was born in Yerushalayim, and then he went down to Egypt because he was supported by his uncle there in Egypt, and he secluded himself to learn Kabbala by the Nile for 7 years, and then Elijah the prophet revealed himself to the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, and told him that his job in life is to go to Tzfas, right, from Egypt to go to Tzfas, and to find this guy, this student by the name of Rabbi Chaim Vital, and teach him whatever he knows, and that's his mission and purpose in life. So it was very important to the Arizal to do that. He actually went from Egypt to Yerushalayim. There's a whole story, and then he saw angels of destruction at the gates of Yerushalayim. He ended up going to Tzfas right away. So he went to Tzfas, and there's a whole story how this Reb Chaim Vital finally discovered the Arizal, and that was his mission. So Reb Chaim Vital, he insisted to be taught this particular secret, which involved, again, negative spirits and negative forces, because there's the positive and the negative. That's the way the Torah says God created the world. There's life and there's death, there's blessing and there's curses. And so he insisted, and the Arizal says, "No, I don't want to teach it to you." And he wants them, and Reb Chaim Vital kept on insisting. Finally, the Arizal went and taught it to him, and then he put his hand on his head, and he said, "Because I just taught you this, it's been decided that I'm going to die," and that was the case. Well, anyways, what you get from these kind of weird, crazy stories is dealing with practical Kabbalah is very dangerous, and nobody does that. It's these days, for sure not. You know what I mean? You don't want to get involved in these things. And as I said before, all of a sudden Tony dropped off. She'll probably come back on again. Okay, so you don't want to deal with these kind of things because as you hear, there can be some crazy repercussions. Okay, I think that's enough on this subject. Let's move on with the Pasach Eliyahu. Any questions or wow to what we just talked about? No? I guess not. Okay. Let me do this. Okay, we got a whole bunch of stuff here now going on. Okay, so the two things you can see, right, is the Patach Eliyahu and this purple picture. Is that it? Yes? You're all muted. Okay, I didn't hear anything.
Yes.
Okay, good, thank you. Okay, so now we're communicating, the connection there. Okay, so let's get into this now after I told you some cool and crazy stuff, right? Okay, so the last thing we were talking about, we said that God is transcendent beyond all that is above. He is concealed behind all that is concealed. No thought can never grasp him. But you are he who brought forth 10 rectifications, right? Those are 10. We're going to learn a little bit more what they are exactly. You are the one that brought these 10 rectifications, and we call them the 10 sefirot of Atzilus. There are 4 spiritual worlds that come after the essence of God. There's the essence of God, and then there's the way he evolves from one chain to the next, from one level to the next. And those are the four worlds. Atzilus is the highest. Then you got Beriah, then you got Yetzirah and Asiya. Those are the four worlds. Okay. So you are the one that brought forth these 10 sefirot, these 10 type of channels that are in the world of Atzilus, in this highest world, with which to regulate the power illumination of your light that flows down through hidden worlds that are not revealed, the worlds of Adam Kadmon and Atzilus, as well as the worlds that are revealed, Bri, Yitzir, and Asiya. So what were those words all about before we get into this other commentary? There is God. God decided to make a world. And he had in his mind how he's going to make this world. Everything that he makes afterwards was in his mind. That means all of these 10 different levels, he's thinking about them. That's called Adam Kadmon, primordial man. You're going to see how all these 10 different expressions are really ending up to be the design of a human being. So that's why it's called the primordial man, because the truth is what God is thinking in his head, so to say, to make the world is really the shape of what ends up becoming the form of a man. So there's God, and he thinks what he wants to do and how he wants to do it. And in order to do that, there are 4 different levels in which God, so to say, turns down his intensity. His intensity, the first level is Atzilus, then there's Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya. After these 4 different levels of turning down the intensity of the great, so to say, force of God, turns it down, turns it down, turns it down a little bit more, right? Becomes this physical world. This physical world is the expression of this spiritual thought. A thought is an energy. That thought that God has is very powerful, too powerful. So he has to then tune it down a little bit. So it's like a very, very smart teacher. And he wants to teach preschoolers. The only way he's going to be able to relate to the preschoolers is that he has what he wants to teach the preschoolers. Then he says, this is way too above their heads. I got to go and tune it down. I got to tone it down more. I got to tone it down even more. So finally, the letters and words that the teacher uses to the 2-year-old, it started out on the level of the professor, who is a very deep and smart individual. Finally, when it comes down to communicating with the 2-year-old, it's down on the level of a 2-year-old. But that's essentially what he had in his mind when he started to think what he wants to teach the 2-year-olds. Essentially, it is the essence of what he had in his mind. It's just right now in its communication, in its projection, in its presentation, it's in, so to say, the packaging for a 2-year-old. Okay, you follow what I'm saying, everybody?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Eileen, for telling me yeah. Okay.
I'm unmuted.
Okay, so remember, what's that?
I've enjoyed this story.
Thank
So,
you.
but what I'm getting from this all is that all of this, the Kabbala is for intellectual, not for actual use.
No, you're right for asking that question and coming to that conclusion, but let me clarify, in response to your question. There are 2 ways in which to use Kabbala. there is a very superficial kind of way, a mechanical kind of a way to use Kabbalah. That's dangerous. So it's like, for example, it's just an example. I want to do an operation, but I'm not a doctor. So what do? I pick up the manual and it says, cut over here, cut over there, do this, do that. And I try to do that. That's practical surgery. But I'm not a surgeon. I'm not a doctor. I don't have the deep knowledge, right, of the body and whatever else it is. That's practical Kabbalah. What we're doing right now is being the right kind of a doctor who doesn't approach the problem in a very, very kind of crude and practical way with a scalpel in his hand. What we're doing right now, by learning the background and the depth of godliness, then you refine your mind and you refine your behavior and you approach the issues of the world in a very, very different manner. I don't know when you fell off the class, the Zoom class, right? But I was saying before, the difference between Yeshu and this other great rabbi, or other different stories, is that these people, they manipulated the forces through what they knew has power in it, but they really, were superseding the plan that God has, and they weren't sensitive enough to that awareness and to that fact. When you study what we're studying and you become deeply familiar and aware of Kabbalah and this metaphysical knowledge, so then your entire perspective is elevated to a level where you bring about the health of the patient, but in a way that is healthy in the grand scheme of things, if you follow the answer to your question. So to practice Kabbalah in the practical way that we talked about in the stories, that's a dangerous approach to using these forces, because of the reason that I just gave and especially in the example that I gave. But when you become aware of these forces through the proper education, through the proper manner, so then you will also be able, through your faith and through your prayer and through more healthier ways, also have an impact and an input into the world and into your life. But you are going to be doing it in a way that is a lot more wholesome and a lot more healthy and perfect. Is that an answer to your question to some degree, Tony?
I think so. Does it have anything to do with use for personal gain versus use for attaining a more godly stance?
Well, yeah, that's part of the answer, and that's going to be, so to say, the outcome of approaching Kabbalah the right way. You are not going to be trying to use Kabbalah for personal reasons, which itself is an expression of ego, and therefore in the realm of negativity. When you're doing something which is an expression of ego, so then you are immediately, or at that moment, you are putting yourself, or you are allowing yourself to be a channel for negative forces. And so that's not going to work out really well. So it's all related. While when you study the Kabbalah the way we're doing it, and the way authentic people become students of Kabbalah, then you're going to have a greater sensitivity and awareness of who is God, where your place is in this world, why God made the world. And so then your awareness and your approach is going to be very different, and therefore the outcome is going to be a lot more healthier. Anyways, that's the answer.
Okay, I think I understand it better now.
Okay. So let me give you a very practical kind of example. So let's say, for example, somebody is sick in the family. You're going to understand that to get that person better, which will be good for that individual, which will be good for the family, which will be good for the world, you're not going to approach trying to improve that person's situation by looking at the books of Kabbala. What name of God should I whisper in his ear, or have him wear on his body, and and try to manipulate things in a mechanical kind of a way? But what you're going to do is you're going to understand God runs the world, and I'm going to put my trust in God's kindness and his mercy. And you're going to realize that by having the right way of trust and of faith and of acceptance, this is another manner in which you connect to God in order to bring health and improvement for the individual. So the outcome, since your approach is a healthier one, the outcome is going to be a much better outcome for the person and for everybody involved. Okay. As Elijah continues his discourse, it will become clear that it is through the sefirot that God constricts his light and thereby gives man the ability to receive the ultimate gift of existence from him. Right? The ultimate gift of existence can only happen if God's shine is filtered and it's somewhat filtered. It's somewhat diminished, and it's somewhat lessened, right? So that the person can live with it, right? If you have an overwhelming kind of sun that's right there in front of your eyes, it's going to burn you to a crisp. It's going to blacken your eyes, and you're not going to be able to benefit from it. But if there's a very, very strong shade and a filter, right? So then not only will it help push back the intensity of the heat, but also of the light. So then you will be able to benefit from both the heat and the light. And that is the only way that you can enjoy the sun. The same thing is also with the sefirot. The sefirot serve the purpose of being a funnel of some sort, a channel, a vessel, to allow God to create the possibility that you can even be aware that you exist and that there is a God. As such, the sefirot act variously as filters, garments, or vessels for the infinite light that fills them. The sefirot are actually the basic conceptual model or structure called here the body that underlines all creation. So the body, the underlying structure to the entire creation, is an expression of these 10 sefirot. Everything in the world is an expression of these 10 sefirot. It has to have an aspect or some kind of a revelation of these 10 sefirot. So, like, for example, if I told you, the essential gene is the DNA of the A, G, C, and T, whatever it is, those 4 building blocks of the DNA. Every single cell is a recipient of the combination of those 4 molecules. That's what we're talking about here now spiritually, right? It happens to be 4 molecules, right? That are the essential language of the DNA of the genes, right? It's 4 worlds, 4 letters of God's name, and that's not coincidental at all, right? So these sefirot allow us to speak about God's immanence in his creation. You remember before we talked about there was the transcendent God, and then we said there was the way God is immanent, the way he comes in the world He allows himself to be relatable. That's the immanence of God. How is God immanent in the world? Only because God's tremendous intensity goes through what God decided to create. In order to relate to the world, God decided to use 10, so to say, vessels or garments. Each one, so to say, description is trying to describe another aspect of how they relate to God. So whether you call them garments, right? A garment is the way that a person relates to other people, right? Or whether you call them a vessel, right? You have a big tap, right? And so it's too much water. It goes through a vessel. So it constricts, it directs the water, right? So each example over here is trying to make a different point, but they're all saying one thing, and that is the way God connects to the entire universe is through these 10 different modes of operation. They allow us to speak about God's immanence in his creation, what he does, without referring directly to what he is, which, as we said, is not only prohibited, but impossible. Nobody can ever understand God himself. It is in this sense that the sefirot, right? We said the sefirot, the word sephira means either count, or the sphere. In other words, there are 10 different counts, 10 different things, or sefirot also means shine. And they really are, different aspects of the same thing, 10 different ways in which God shines. He put, like, so to say, a green light and a red light and a white light and an orange light and a purple light. And it's all those that everything in the world is created from. And these are the keys to such expressions. The Torah is God's eyes, God's ears, God's hand. God doesn't have eyes. He's not physical. He doesn't have ears or hands. But through the sefirot, we are able to relate to what God does as if they were hands, or as if they were ears, or as if they were eyes. For they tell us about God's actions. These anthropomorphisms are in no way meant to refer to God himself, because God is way beyond being limited only to an ear, or to an eye, or to a hand. God is way beyond that. God is, you can't even imagine what God is. But in order for God to relate to us, so he decided to channel himself in such a way that to us, we can relate to him as he sees us through his eyes. He hears us through his ears. But the actual physical design is not true to God, because God is not physical. The hidden worlds that are not revealed include, like I told you before, the world that is above the four worlds is called Adam Kadmon. That's the primordial world. And the many worlds that emanate from its ears, nose, mouth, as well as its hair. So the fact that we have hair and an eye and a nose and an ear, that's a physical kind of expression of the way God thought in his mind, in his ethereal, in his metaphysical mind, how he was going to reveal himself to the world. So let's say, for example, in my head, right? I think in my head I want to have a house, and in that house I have to have a place to sleep. I'm just thinking about a place to sleep. So then later on, as that idea develops, I get a bedroom, I get a bed. But then, when you have a bedroom, I need to go to the toilet. So then I get a toilet. And then if I'm having a house, I need to have a place to eat. I get a kitchen. But what did it start out in his head? In his head, it didn't necessarily start out as I want to have a bedroom and a kitchen. I know I want to have a place to sleep. I know I want to have a place to eat. So by thinking in those terms become the underlying cause for there to be a bedroom, for there to be a kitchen. You follow what I'm saying? So when we're talking about this primordial man, which is above even the four worlds, and that's the first level where God starts thinking about creating a universe, right? So this primordial man, which is the most hidden of all worlds, there is a place in that primordial man where what God is thinking about becomes ears and nose, becomes a mouth, becomes hair and all that. Okay. Indeed, it is through these 10 spheres of each universe that you are hidden from human beings so they can exist and not be overwhelmed by your light. These 10 spheros that we're just now introducing, Elijah is just now introducing to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai as the way God created the world. He's telling him that these 10 spheros are right from the start, all the way down through all the worlds, and it's behind these spheros in every single world where God is hidden behind it. You can't see God. You only can see what comes through the filter. When you see the color red, that's not because God is red. When you see the kitchen, that's not because God has a kitchen. You are only seeing an expression that God wants you to be aware of, to sort of say, enjoy an experience of God. Yes, Yaakov.
So, Rabbi, you're basically saying, I don't want to put words in your mouth, that these sefirot is a way that God reveals himself to the world. But it also, these sefirot in Kabbala not only reveals himself to the world, it hides himself, his essence. It's hiding God's essence.
You got it. You hit it right on the head. That's right. So the sefirot, right, the sefirot carry in them what would appear to be two opposite qualities in them. On the one hand, it's the only way that we get to see and enjoy and experience God. Otherwise, it would be too overwhelming. But because it's the way we are able to enjoy and experience God, the only way that's possible is because these are the filters that are hiding God. On every level, as you go higher or as you go lower, they are thicker and thicker. So when you come to the lowest world, which is world number 4, the one just before ours, the thickness, the congeality, I don't know what the right word is, the hardness or the level of the filter is extremely strong on the 4th level. On the 3rd level, it's less. On the 2nd, it's even less. On the 1st level, it's even less. So, in other words, there's a funneling down, or there's a intensifying of the filter as it, so to say, makes the awareness of God more on our part and less from the perspective of God. The more God has to withdraw himself, the thicker he has to put the filter in front of him so that it shouldn't be too strong for the recipient to be able to experience himself.
So is that why you see these inverted triangles? These are the different levels?
Which one? This one here?
Well, I see all these triangles seem to be inverted.
This here?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't see triangles, and don't look at it as any triangles. Don't look at the shape right now. The only thing you're going to see over here, I don't know if we're going to get to it soon here in this Patach Aliyah. In fact, we would maybe, right? But this thing over here is going through what exactly, the 10 spheres are, and in the position that they become lower and lower. So it starts with the first, right? You see here where it says Ein Sof? Can you see Ein Sof?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Ein Sof means that's where the infinite light starts. Then God lowers. This is the first level where God, so to say, puts the first filter in front of himself. This represents the highest level of a person's body. So you know when they say there's a halo on top of the guy's head? This is the top of the head of the first level of creation, right? Why do we walk around as human beings with the head on the top and our feet down at the bottom? We could have easily been created in such a way where our feet were on the top, our head is on the bottom, and somehow we jumped on our head. I mean, it could have easily been that way, where we walk on our head and our feet are dangling up in the air. The reason why we have our head on the top, in other words, our highest faculty is on the top and our lowest faculty is on the bottom, is because that's the order in which God lowers the light from one level to the next. So it starts with the top, and in here, right, is the two dimensions of a person's brain, the right side and the left side. This is still part of the head. All this is part of the head. This is the right side of the brain. This is the left side of the brain. So in the right, I'm just going through this quick, but I didn't even talk much about this top level, right? The top level is the highest shine of the person's soul, which represents, for example, the person's will, desire. Will and desire is the strongest expression of a person's soul, right? What a person wants will affect everything about his body. The state in which a person's desire is in will affect the entire body. Your most important attention should always be given to your state of mind. Your state is like is the feeling, the desire you have. No, it's not so much of an emotion, right? It's higher than that. So the will, the desire, the enjoyment you have in life, all that is the top and top. Then you have the brain, which has a right side and a left hemisphere. That happens to be the case, right? So you got a right side and a left side. Starts with this, it goes to that. And then these are the emotions, which are down in the person's torso, right? These are like in his heart area, all right? This is the middle of his body, right? This goes down, right? So we're going to get to that eventually, hopefully. But that's what this diagram is about. It's representing the highest level of God's and of the soul's shine in the person's life, in his body. And then as it goes lower and lower, in other words, there becomes less of the strength and of the character of the soul, right? So the highest revealed level of the soul is the fact that you can think. You know, that's the highest level. That's incredible quality that the soul has. That and then there's there is breaking it apart, what you're thinking about. Anyway, I don't want to, I see the time. Let's just go on over here a little bit and try to do this. I don't want to jump the gun. Okay, so it's through these 10 sefirot that a person, that God hides, realize that when you're talking about the 10 sefirot, you are looking at something in which God is hidden. That's the point he's trying to emphasize. But it actually happens to be that in these sefirot where God is hidden, you are being able through those windows and through the filter to be able to have the experience of God. The inner makeup of each world consists of a unified structure of 10 sefirot or divine attributes. In essence, they are the qualities through which God interacts with his world. Like garments, they conceal the powerful radiation of his infinite light at the same time that they serve to reveal it. So I just spent a whole bunch about that, right? So these 10 sefirot are, on the one hand, they are garments. The sefira is the garment. It is the mode that you get to see and that the person relates to you. Person relates to you through his garments. They stink, they're clean, they're expensive, they're cheap, they're in good condition. A person relates to another individual through his garments. But when you are communicating with a person, you have to always remember you're not connecting with the clothing that the person is wearing. He's wearing $10,000 watch, and he's wearing a suit that's $50,000, and whatever else it is. Don't lose sight of the fact that what you're communicating with is the individual who is inside and behind this clothing. This clothing may be a good message that the person is giving, right? He's showing off, or he's poor, whatever else it is. There is a message that the person gives through his clothing, but it's just a message. It's not the person himself. The person himself is deep down inside those clothing. God, the infinite being, unites all these 10 different spirits within himself as one in a complete unity. This is true not only while they are still subsumed in his infinite oneness, but even after they are emanated. I'll explain to you in just a moment. Because they are fashioned from his oneness, they continue to shine together as one, even in diversity. This is very, very powerful in science, and this is very powerful even in our own physical bodies. And so what he's saying over here, since all these 10 different expressions come out of the one God, and the one God is always inside all of these 10 expressions, that means all these 10 expressions are all connected to each other, and they all have inside themselves each other, and most important, they all have inside themselves the unity of the one God. So the truth is, whether you're connecting to God through any of these 10 different expressions, inside each of these 10 expressions is all the 10 expressions. Why? Because you have the one God who has inside himself those 10 expressions. So when we discover today, for example, with stem cells, that in every single cell, there is the entire spectrum of all the chromosomes and all the DNA, that's exactly what we're saying over here. Underlying everything is everything, even when it comes out and expresses itself in one particular organ. So even when you have the brain, the heart, the kidney, whatever it is, and it's right now only this one expression. It's Chachma, it's Bina, it's Hoid, it's Netzach. It's only one particular expression of the 10. No. Inside and behind that individual expression is the one God who contains in himself, in his oneness, all 10 expressions. It's only that in this particular filter, he decides to make most prominent this one particular expression. Because of this principle, stem cells are very real and very true. The first time I heard about stem cells, I understood it right away. And it was not a surprise to me, because that's what Kabbala explains is the way the world exists. And in particular, a human being. The human being that is an expression of these 10, a very real and a very tangible expression of these 10 spheros, by having the one at the top, and the other two on both sides of his head, then his right hand and his left hand, and then his body and his 2 feet, right? All of this form of the body is exactly what we're reading over here as the manner in which the spiritual metaphysical thoughts of God evolve into this physical world. And what are we reading over here? We just read it right now. Because they are fashioned from his oneness, they continue to shine together as one, even in diversity. I could just change the words over here and say, because the whole body is one, underlying it all is all one DNA. They continue to shine every single part of the chromosomes in the DNA, even when it turns into one organ. I can just turn the words, and it's exactly what it's saying here about God 2,000 years ago. That is, they continue to reveal his oneness even through their diverse qualities. One who truly perceives this oneness in all, even in this world, which gives the impression that things can exist separately from his blessed oneness, will be privileged to behold these great lights in their pristine form in the world to come. Now that's powerful stuff. If you can develop an appreciation for what we're talking about right now, that means in a certain way, I see Yaakov, hold on. That means that you have developed a connection to this truth, and what you connect with in this lifetime, as we talked about in our hourly classes, remains the person you are forever. So when you are going to truly appreciate what we're studying here tonight and start to look at the world this way, right now in a physical body, you don't get the depth of what you're actually understanding. But in the world to come, you will be connected to an incredible, broader, and deeper attachment with God himself. Okay. Yaakov, what was your point?
No, just a question. So the singular, the sefirot, each one of these have its own characteristics. They can either work together, and sometimes they could work against each other, but the final result at the end is a unified shared goal.
So let me just add a little something to what you just said, and that is the way they are designed by God, the way they are meant to work by God, is although they are very diverse from each other, they are meant to work complementing each other in a wholesome, holistic kind of a way. The heart is not meant to work against the brain. The brain is not meant to work against the heart. The liver is not meant to work against the heart. Everything is designed in such a way that they are a holistic whole. Now, if you overemphasize one aspect more than it should be, then it could end up being problematic in the grand picture that God intended and wanted it to work like. So we need to use the Torah as a guide to help us be balanced in the right kind of a manner. But the way God intended it to be, he intended that their diversity should complement each other in their differences. Because if God didn't make things different from each other, everything would be just one glob of oneness, like God himself. Then there couldn't be you and there couldn't be me. The only way there can be you and me is because we were made different than each other. And that's how there can be you and me and Eileen and Tony and the 8 billion other people here on the face of this earth. There has to be diversity. And if we follow the prescription of God, his intention is that it should all work in a way where they all support each other for a greater good. Now, we have free choice, and we could do things in such a way where we overemphasize the emotions over the brain, and then we don't work the way God wanted us to work, and that is where the brain should always be leading the body. The intellect should always be leading the body. If the intellect concludes that it can't understand something, so it wants to turn to the intuitions of the heart, but that was the conclusion of the brain. But the way God intended things to work is that the brain is on the top, and it's meant to be the leader to influence everything of the body. You get my answer, Yaakov?
Yeah, so without the Torah, these sefirot could be helter-skelter. They could be going in all different directions. They're not working together.
Yeah, they are working together. The way God set them up.
Without Torah, without the Torah, you don't have a way of God. You don't have a way of the mitzvot.
Correct. But if you don't have, without the wisdom of God,
Without the wisdom of God.
without the guidance and the wisdom of God, then you are apt to end up manipulating your life in such a way where it's not going to be in a way that is balanced to make things work in a healthy way.
Get the helter-skelter. Okay.
So when God says, for example, like I just said right now, you know what I mean, that or you have to rest once a week, you have to keep the Shabbos, you got to give tzedakah. In other words, you got to think of the greater good. You got to keep kosher. You got to be disciplined in the way you eat and what you eat. So this is the guidance. These are all just physical expressions that direct the inner, so to say, spirit that is inside, that it should go in a healthy direction. The way God created it, if we follow, the prescription of God, it's all going to be good. Because the way he designed it is that they're all meant to be supportive. And in the end, since God is the essence of good, so everything, is made in that kind of a fashion.
Right.
If we didn't mess up our bodies, you know what I mean? So then this is what the Rambam says in regards to the whole world. God made a good world. God made a person that he can be healthy and well. It's because we make wrong choices, we overemphasize or de-emphasize, you know what I mean, and that we mess ourselves up. How do we know if we're overdoing something or underdoing something? So you got to turn to God's manual, since he's the one that made us. So he knows what is the right balance to make all these 10 sefirot work in such a way that they are healthy and truly a blessing. I'm way over my time. I don't care, but I like I said in the past, I know sometimes it's not a healthy thing. People want to get off. Okay, anyway, so yeah, that's a little bit of it. Listen, next week, Tuesday night, is still the fast of Tisha B'Av. Do you want to do the hold on a minute, let me see if I can stop this. Do you want to do the thing next week, Wednesday night? The next class, next week, Wednesday night.
That works for me.
I'm just looking at my calendar. Could you send that? Yeah, I could do it. Could you just send out, please, a reminder in the WhatsApp?
Yeah. Okay. So we'll do it next week, Wednesday night,
Okay.
because Monday night, Tuesday is Tisha B'Av, and let's hope everything is going to be good and Mashiach is going to come before then.
Okay.
I can do Wednesday.
Okay. So it's next Wednesday.
Okay. Leila Tov, Toda Rabah.
Okay. I'm going to put up the. We spoke about a lot of great things tonight again, and this is really the underlying strength and energy to life, to the world, to living in a good way. So you'll be able to. Let's see. Hold on, what's going on over here? No. Okay, we spoke. Let me repeat that again. We spoke about an incredible. Do you see this other picture here right now?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so this is a little bit more accurate describing what we're talking about and how they end up becoming the way the man was formed in this kind of a fashion, right? So it's similar to this other one, but you have it here with wisdom and understanding. Yeah, and maybe next week we'll be able to get to it. So that's why the right hand is always the one that is stronger, and that's the one that's giving. And that's what you see over here. Anyways, we had an incredible class. We talked about a lot of incredible ideas, and hopefully it's going to help improve, help guide, help give strength to all of your lives.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi. You got everybody have a
Thank
good
you.
night.
Have a good night, and let's pray to God that everything turns out good in the world. We need a lot of prayer today.
Yes, we do.
Okay, have a good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.